For centuries, the rise and fall of great empires has been told through stories of kings, wars, and revolutions. But what if I told you the real story is far darker and far more hidden? Behind every empire, from Rome to Britain to America, there has always been a shadowy force pulling the strings. Not armies, not politicians, but money and those who control it. Most people believe nations collapse because of invasions, corruption, or weak leaders. That's the history books version. But the truth is far more dangerous. Time and time again, empires have been strangled from the inside, not by swords or bombs, but by the chains of debt. And the ones holding those chains were not ordinary rulers. They were the financial mafia of their time. Think about it. Who decides when wars can be fought? Who decides when nations rise or fall? Not presidents, not generals. It's the men who print the money, who create the credit, who turn paper promises into weapons more powerful than any army. These financial masterminds don't just influence governments. They own them, and the pattern has never changed. Rome fell because its money was corrupted. The French monarchy drowned in debt long before the guillotine came down. Even the mighty British Empire, which once ruled a quarter of the world, was quietly dismantled by its own financiers. Every empire in history has had its rulers and its creditors. So here's the question. If money is the lifeblood of nations, then what happens when a small group secretly controls the veins? And more importantly, what if they already control ours? To understand how this financial mafia operates, we need to go back, way back, to the origins of money and debt itself. In ancient times, money was simple. Gold, silver, copper, coins that had real weight, real value. If you had it in your hand, it was yours. Governments collected taxes, armies were paid in silver, and trade was honest because the money was honest. But here's the problem. Empires always wanted more than they could afford. Wars drained treasuries. Palaces cost fortunes. And emperors discovered a dangerous trick. They learned they could cheat. Rome, for example, began mixing cheap metals into its silver coins. At first, no one noticed. Soldiers were still paid, markets still functioned. But soon, the coins became worthless. Prices exploded. Ordinary Romans saw their savings vanish overnight. Bread that once cost 1 coin now cost 10. Sound familiar? Fast forward 1,000 years. Medieval kings borrowed heavily from bankers to fund endless wars. When the debts piled up, the bankers demanded repayment, not just in gold, but in land, influence, and privileges. In France, it was debt that hollowed out the monarchy. Long before the Revolution, kings were pawns to financiers, trapped in loans they could never escape. The people saw rising taxes, crushing poverty, and no relief. The guillotine didn't just cut off a king's head, it severed the chains of debt choking a nation. And then came the British Empire, the most powerful empire in modern history. Its navy ruled the seas, its colonies spanned the globe. But behind the red banners and royal crowns was a quiet, unstoppable engine: debt. The British government borrowed colossal sums from private bankers to fund wars against France, to expand colonies, to build fleets. On paper, Britain was rich, but in reality, the empire was owned by its creditors. The bankers of London had more power than any king or parliament. Here's the shocking truth. Every time an empire looked invincible, debt was already rotting it from the inside. Ordinary people felt it as higher taxes, inflated prices, or vanishing savings. Elites ignored it until it was too late. And the financial mafia? They never lost. Whether empires rose or collapsed, the creditors always walked away richer. The story of Rome, France, and Britain might sound like distant history, but it isn't. The same playbook is alive today, just dressed in modern clothes. Only now, the scale is bigger and the weapons are invisible. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that changed money forever. He cut the link between the US dollar and gold. Overnight, the dollar became what economists call fiat money. Money backed by nothing but trust. And just like the Roman emperors who mixed cheap metal into silver, modern governments discovered they could print unlimited dollars out of thin air. At first, it seemed like magic. America could fund wars in Vietnam, expand social programs, and build the global economy, all with money created by a keystroke. But the bill always comes due. By the 1980s, inflation soared, wages stagnated, and ordinary families struggled just to keep up with the rising cost of living. Sound familiar? And it didn't stop there. After the 2008 financial crisis, trillions were printed to bail out banks too big to fail. During the pandemic, governments around the world flooded economies with even more cheap money. The result? Skyrocketing prices, exploding national debts, and ordinary people drowning in credit cards, student loans, and mortgages. Meanwhile, who benefits? The same financial mafia that has always pulled the strings. Today, it's not kings or emperors, it's central banks, hedge funds, and global financial institutions. They decide interest rates. They decide who gets rescued and who gets ruined. They decide how long the empire survives, and the pattern is identical to history. Rome debased its coins. We debase our currency with printing presses and digital money. The French monarchy drowned in debt. Today, the United States carries over $35 trillion in debt, a number so big it can never truly be repaid. Britain handed power to its creditors. And now, nations from Africa to Asia are trapped in loans from global lenders, forced to surrender resources, ports, and sovereignty. Here's the hard truth. Empires don't collapse in a day. They collapse slowly, quietly, as their people lose faith in money. And when the trust is gone, everything else goes with it. So the question isn't if history will repeat. The question is who will pay the price when it does. So what do we learn from all of this? What do Rome, France, Britain, and now America all have in common? 3 lessons stand out, and they're not just history. They're warnings. Lesson 1. Inflation is never an accident. Governments present it as a natural problem, like bad weather. But in reality, inflation is a policy, a deliberate way to shrink your savings, pay debts with cheaper money, and keep the system alive just a little longer. It's not a mistake. It's a strategy. Lesson 2. Real wealth is never paper. Empires have printed promises for centuries. Coins, notes, bonds, even today's digital dollars. And every single time, those promises eventually failed. The people who survived were the ones who held real assets. Land, gold, silver, businesses, resources. Things you can touch. Things that last when paper burns. Lesson 3. Empires don't collapse when they lose wars. They collapse when they lose trust. Rome's soldiers stopped believing in their coins. French citizens stopped believing in their king's promises. And today, ordinary people are starting to question the value of the dollar, the euro, and every other paper currency. Once that faith is gone, it doesn't come back. These lessons aren't about the past. They're about the future we're all living in right now. Because if history teaches one thing, it's this. Money isn't just a tool. It's a weapon. And the financial mafia knows exactly how to use it. History has spoken, again and again. Empires rise on trust, and they collapse on debt. Rome thought its coins would always buy loyalty. France thought its kings could borrow forever. Britain thought its empire was too vast to fail. They were all wrong, and today's empire is no different. The financial mafia still sits in the shadows. Only now they wear suits instead of crowns, they print trillions instead of minting coins, and their reach stretches across the entire globe. They believe they can control nations, enslave generations, and rewrite the rules of money itself. But history is whispering the same warning. No empire cheats forever. So the question isn't whether collapse will come. The question is when, and who will be left standing when it does. If you want to uncover more hidden stories of how money has built and destroyed the greatest powers on earth, make sure you subscribe. Because this story is just beginning.